if you spend your life doing that, you've actually got to have an affinity with the materials that you work with, the things that you set up around you.
Today I'll be speaking to Carol Robertson, a painter that I've admired for quite a long time. I saw her show last year at Flowers East. One of her paintings, Madrigal Echo, has stayed with me and continues to be one of my favourite paintings of all time. I was just curious really about the way that you actually use the circles and the dots within your work, because they're so meticulous. I love the dot. It's something that I use all the time in my own work, but I'm not so rigid with it. And I just wondered if you could just maybe talk to me about how long you've been using it as a motif, and why it's so important to you as a vehicle to sort of express your ideas.
I mean, I've used the circle for very many years, since the 1990s. They are, for me, an archetypal form, the purest of all of the geometric forms. And I've always used geometry, but circles in particular have a resonance personally for me.
I saw that show at Flowers
Oh, did
last
you see that?
September. Beautiful, beautiful work.
I mean, I was working with circles and stars in that exhibition. The prints were either of eclipses, which is, I'm something of a stargazer. So, I look at the sky, the night sky, a lot. I can do an enormous number of prints in a week that would take me absolutely ages, years to paint. So I can process a lot of ideas about colour with screen printing that then feed back into painting. I spend months sometimes working on paintings, and they're very slow to make because they're all painted quite meticulously by hand. I'll start by flooding the surface with poured oil paint mixed with white spirit or terps in several layers, actually, which can take a month. And then that sets a context, if you like, almost an atmospheric context in which to then draw and then paint the circles. And they're done with a compass, but then painted by hand. There's no fast track for that for me. I use small brushes to work on the edge of each ring, and then bigger brushes to fill in. So you get a little bit of history at the back sometimes. Or when I repaint a circle, I might repaint it but leave a tiny, tiny thin band around the edge to just reveal something of what was there before. And of course, each time you do that, you gain a little rim of paint.
So it must take a long time. Tiny brushes and
it's like anything, you're good at it because you do it a lot.
yeah.
I'm actually very good at painting circles. For me, it's that working, earning the edge, the human touch that's the most important thing. It's a very slow, quiet, meditative process. Very different, I think, from your process, which is quite spontaneous.
My work has lots and lots of layers, and I start in the same way. I build up sort of very turpentine based layers that create a depth within the work, and then there's this sort of organic, sort of hands off, hands on painting process where nature of the oil paint is part of the process, and it's really important in the way that the work looks. I then start adding the tiny minute dots and with a tiny brush, and then that takes me a long time. Like you, it can take months to finish the surface. So although our work is very different, I think there's quite a lot of similarities in the way that we enjoy the repetition and we find it quite meditative. It's a process.
The repetition is important. I mean, it's something significant for very many artists.
Yeah.
It's where, for me, the sense of self is coming to something again and again and finding each time something new and different, even through the minutest changes sometimes. I find sometimes more out about myself through these small variations than I do sometimes by making something quite maverick, perhaps not circles, using other forms, which I do. I also don't want to say something in the same way again and again. So the colour often is the thing that hugely, massively changes the character of the work. There's a play for me at the moment with music and sound, and I think the exhibition you saw had a painting that was called Madrigal Echo.
Yeah, I love that painting with the slack dots on the top.
Yes, and
Slack dots.
that stemmed from an experience during lockdown when I was walking through my local park. I saw a company of madrigal singers standing in a circle with the guys on one side and the girls on the other. So there were these softer, lighter voices on one side, darker voices on the other, singing to one another. And I was thinking about that almost chromatically in terms of colour. So I created this vertical line of split circles. They're split down the middle with one side light and one side dark, but in a vertical line, each circle different colours. And for me, they came to represent sounds and voices of those singers. I've often tried to renegotiate sound and experience through colour. They're strongly related. I mean, I look at the night sky on a clear night, at the stars, and that's just life's greatest mystery for me. It's connecting me to whatever else is out there in an unfathomable way that I can't really grasp and imagine. And sometimes through painting, I get back to something that I feel and experience when I look at a night sky or a beautiful sunset or snow falling that just fill you with wonder and awe. Do you find that sometimes you have to leave your home and where you live and work and go to places in order to be provoked and inspired?
For the first 10 years when we were here, the Welsh landscape was enough for me, and I didn't feel the need to sort of travel. I go to Iceland a lot. One of the most incredible things I ever saw in my life, and I will carry it with me forever. And the stars were absolutely incredible, and the snow was falling, and the light from the twinkling light from the stars and the snow falling towards my eyes, the whole of space just flattened, and it was full of these tiny little dots, and it made me feel like I connected on an atomic level to something that was just massive. It's almost like your ideas become distilled in a way. I think you are right. You do have to travel, don't you, to see things from a different perspective.
Now you're working for a show coming up.
Yeah, I've got a big solo exhibition coming up in the summer at Oriel Davies, a big gallery in the middle of Wales. But the work's very, very big. They're about 180 by 3 meters, and I've got 8 of them.
I work on small paintings, medium paintings, and large paintings too, but I love the large paintings. They're somehow very significant works. It is something to do with their scale. It becomes environmental. There's something to do with the physicality of your own human's size, working and standing in front of a very big work by any artist.
It's quite tricky though, isn't the actual physical making, because I stand them up, but obviously the paint's quite watery, so it runs, so I have to work on them quite flat, and then the actual process of stretching further they can actually reach into the centre to get the marks down, that's exhausting.
It's a challenge. It can be a real challenge. If they're big, I stand them against the wall first of all and pour the paint from top to bottom, but the top against the wall may well be the sides, left and right of the painting, and I'll then lift them down onto the floor and tip them backwards and forwards from side to side until the paint settles in a way I want it to, and that's quite difficult to control on a big painting. You have to completely cover the studio in plastic on the floor and make an unholy mess. But I always think that should never matter, really. It takes the time it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. If it fails, it fails. You just need to try. That's what I always say to myself. Sometimes I just think, oh God, what am I doing? But it's almost like I have to push them to a point of destruction at that tipping point, and then I can bring them back in. I like that sort of teetering on the edge of a void, really. And then it's like, okay, it's at that point now I can drag them back. I love the way that you can put something on a canvas at 4 o'clock at night in the studio, and then you go back the next morning and it doesn't look the same with oil, does it? It's got that wonderful life of its own, and it dries. It'll dry and set in different ways every time you use it, and I do like that unpredictability of it.
It's very flexible, isn't it? I mean, the colour's beautiful. It can have a wonderful transparency. It can dry slowly. You can add
Yeah,
other mediums to make it dry faster. I love it. I like the smell of it, the feel of it, the
yeah.
touch of it.
Oh, I know. Linseed oil. Oh,
I guess if you spend your life doing that, you've actually got to have an affinity with
yeah.
the materials that you work with, the things that you set up around you. Or sometimes I become obsessed with colours that I use and use and use, and I overuse them, and they lose their magic for a while. So to use something almost opposite is very helpful. And often I have to paint it out, but it just, as you say, throws a lot in that's wrong, but then you set about working out how to solve it or
And
resolve
also,
it.
and also that archaeology, like you were saying, the fact that you've got that sort of shadow of something that was there before as well that you weren't happy with. It's almost like you need that, don't you, to give a painting life, to give that sort of substance and space within the work.
Yes, you
Yeah.
do.